Welcome everyone to yet another SDN Community Voices, our weekly touch point between you, the service design community, and the service design network, where we try to bring every week a different community voice, a different topic to talk about and interact here live with you. And today I'm very excited to have Julia Marina Cunha with me, my fellow Brazilian. We're going to talk a little bit about the intersection of design and stigma. So I'll bring her up and let her introduce herself. Hey.
Hi Felipe. Hi everyone. I'm Julia. I'm a designer. I have a background in product design. Nowadays, I work with service design for innovation. Um, I'm very excited to be here to talk about this intersection about design and stigma because it was the subject I explored during my research, and also because I think that it's such a coincidence that we both explored this subject, but from very different perspectives.
Yeah.
So it's gonna be an interesting conversation. Thank you for having me, Felipe.
Thank you for coming. I think it was quite interesting because we met through Community Voices. You saw one of the episodes, and then when we started talking, we realized that we both were working with hearing loss stigma and how to kind of tackle it through design. But first, like to start it off, let's say, what actually brought you to the topic of hearing loss stigma?
Yes. So I guess I had different, like, some influences uh, for starting thinking about that, different sources. I guess the first spark came from my personal life. My sister has worn a hearing aid since childhood. So
Hmm?
that was the first thing. Then during my time at the university, I had the chance to learn from some professors that were already conducting research on design and assistive tech. And then I remember specifically a book that I read back in 2016 that is called Design Meets Disability.
Hmm.
And I remember that, yeah, that this book really inspired me to think about that and even come up with an idea for hearing aid concept that I ended up developing. And then this later evolved into my research.
Hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah,
And
that's fair.
I saw that you are also had like a personal relation with
Yeah,
hearing
and I think
loss.
that was something that was quite interesting for me because, yeah, my grandpa has been using hearing aids for quite some time. He doesn't really like them at all and barely uses them, to be honest, because he just says that they don't really work. Maybe they don't. Maybe it's a little bit also his stigma of not wanting to use them. But at the same time, every single person that I ended up talking about hearing loss when I was doing my master thesis, they always had somebody that they knew had like either a grandparent or a family member or a friend or somebody that they knew that had hearing loss. And that's quite, I don't know, eye-opening for some of them when I was talking about them because they were like, "Oh yeah, that's true. There's somebody that I know that has that, right?" And also they don't like to admit that they have hearing loss or they don't want to use the hearing aid that we bought them and stuff like that. So it's definitely an ingrowing problem.
Yes, and when you talk about like how hearing loss is a common problem, yeah, I remember that during my research there was something that really caught my eye. Like it's like I guess second most common disability
Mhm.
after I think after other like eye sight
Yeah,
disabilities and so and that's also related to age, right? So hearing loss is a problem that is common with age, and you approached how these how hearing loss stigma is kind of overlaps with ageism, for example. And
yeah,
that's very interesting because then you can see how these things can even make it make this stigma worse somehow. And this problem that you mentioned about your grandpa don't want to use the hearing aid, I think it's something also about um, being adaptable in a way. And
Yeah.
with age, this is harder somehow. Uh,
Yeah, and I
using
see with so many times talking with my grandpa, specifically about different services and everything. So, for one example that came to mind now was that in Brazil now they changed the system of the TVs, so they are kind of apps instead of channels. And for my grandpa, that was the worst. He loves watching TV, but instead of just clicking up and down to change channel, he had to navigate the grid of different channels to be able to watch TV, which just created a bigger kind of let's say wall to be able to do something that was so simple before. And then not even
yes.
talking about hearing loss and hearing aids as something that can be even more new because it's something that you might not even get you to come across until you're a little bit older. But at the same time, what I saw also in my research is that there is three main things that kind of interact to create this hearing loss stigma. One of them is ageism, the other one is ableism, so really not wanting to admit that you have a disability. And the other one was vanity, which I think also connects very well with the way you approached your work with product design.
Yes, I think it's all about meaning, because the meaning we give to things. For example, hearing aids. As you said, you explored in a more systemic way, I would say, because you acknowledged it is a complex problem, and you managed to use these critical tools, critical design tools, and I end up focusing more on the device that is the
Mm,
product. And in a way, like, these devices end up being a signal of the disability, and that's why they can be stigmatized. And even though that stigma is something that is related to a person, so we stigmatize um, a characteristic of a person. Hearing aids, for example, can act as a signal of the disability, and then disability is related to all these undervalued traits that ends up being harmful for the person's own self-esteem, and also society's perception in general. So this can lead to social isolation, even not wanting to use the device. That is something I think we both saw.
yeah,
And yeah, from the relation, from our connection here with vanity and aesthetics. um, yeah, aesthetics was something I focus more on. I always have this fear that it may come up with like something that is superficial when I talk about aesthetics, but I also think that we have to understand that aesthetics, it's what leads to the meanings that we give to things, especially when uh, there this with these products that are wearables, like we
yeah,
wear clothes to the body. And so, like, we can choose to wear a clothes or accessories, and so on. We choose what we want to express using these products. And with assistive devices, this is not something that the industry in general considers, like, that this can be something that is expressing uh, other things uh, that like besides disability. So if you
yeah,
don't give the possibility of choice, like, to people to choose what they want to communicate through this object. So the only thing you are communicating through hearing aid, for example, is the disability itself, because you are saying that by making them invisible, by making them as small as possible, that disability is something to be ashamed of, in a way.
yeah. And I think it really connects what you're saying with the whole telling the story, how you're putting the story of the disability and the story of those assisted devices, right? Because one thing that I thought was quite interesting from the beginning when I was starting to talk about this topic of hearing loss stigma with Federico Di Fresco at WSA, we were talking so much about how much eyewear, right? So glasses are really told the story so much differently that nowadays it became a fashion statement more than actually an assisted device. But as you said, the eyesight problems is the first disability, and then you come hearing loss. So why? Not necessarily it's a good way they're telling the story, but why are they so different? One way that is showing this really fashion focus device that people even that don't have a problem with their eyesight are starting to wear glasses just as a matter of style. But then when you go to hearing loss, it's something very technical centric and just related to medical field. So it creates kind of this big gap that where stigma can kind of create also different stories and different ways people are being perceived.
Yes, that was also something that I studied, like because it's really interesting when you compare how these two objects are perceived in society. And I remember seeing something about the history of that, like because in the beginning, glasses were always also medical things, medical
Yeah.
devices, and then they evolved to being fashion accessories because the industry kind of adopted these as a way of making a statement about you what you wanted to express, and then because of that, it ended up being this accessory that we know nowadays and have all these meanings that are very different from hearing aids. And so, yeah, brought when we bring up these questions, these reflections, I think this is a good way to start these conversations. And I remember specifically an design fiction that you created in your work. That was the Tom Ford, right? The Tom Ford hearing aid.
Yeah. Wait, let me see. I think I have it here.
I
Keep
think that
talking.
that is great. Yeah, I think that is great. Like to make us think about these possibilities. Yeah, exactly.
So
Very.
yes.
Yeah.
So the idea here, as you're saying, was just how can you tell the story of the eyewear, but in this case, it's hearwear, right? So creating
Mm.
future stories that are talking about the same kind of structures we have nowadays, but in the future, talking about eyewear, how it would be differently.
Yes. And when we start to think about these possibilities, I think it's crucial to understand that it's also about the possibility of choice. Because I
Mm.
saw during my research that it's not everyone that is gonna like having these more statement pieces, I would say, like using it as an accessory, but it's about giving this possibility, like if you want to choose to express yourself some way differently through the product, you can. But if you want to hide it, it's your right as well. Like it's
Yeah.
your the thing, it's the possibility of choice here. Yeah.
But you cannot make assumptions for that group of saying, yeah, no, everyone of in that group wants to hide it, and let's make them as small as possible so you cannot see it, or everyone in that group wants to have it as a fashion statement. And I feel that again with the analogy with the glasses is quite similar because you have a lot of people that wear glasses, but you also have the contact lenses that I know they don't fully overlap. You cannot just sometimes you cannot wear contact lenses, you have to wear glasses, but you give that choice. And I have multiple people that I know that sometimes they're like, no, I don't like glasses, they're uncomfortable, I don't like how they look or something, so I'm going to use contact lenses, or the other way around. And at the same time, I think it's a little bit about awareness because it is a very important and pressing topic that, as I was saying, a lot of people know about it, but a lot of times they just think, oh yeah, it's going to come, and when it comes, it happens. But it's being so much more pressing nowadays because we have so much more noise pollution in the cities, so many of those things that are making it much, much worse. So it's being more and more common for people younger in the younger generations to start having debilitating hearing loss much earlier, not because of age, but because of just the brute noise of the cities and concerts and things like that. And it's so easy to start losing your hearing, right? Anything that's over 80 decibels can start having a permanent hearing loss in the long term.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That's also what makes this group of people that have hearing loss so diverse, um, like any other group. And the thing is that often we see that, like society in general, see that as a homogeneous group, like it, like if everyone would be equal, like the only thing that it's important about people with hearing loss is the disability itself, when
Yeah,
it's actually not, because you have all these different contexts. You have younger people, older people, you have, well, lots of intersectionality within this group, and so you have to consider that there's this whole diversity of desires, and
yeah.
yeah, so this is a key element, I think.
Yeah, I really that really reminds me of one of the keynotes from the Services I Global Conference. The first one, he's on accessibility design. That she put a quote there that was, "I don't have a disability." Like I'm kind of going over it, but I more or less, I don't have a disability, but society imposes a disability into me. So
Mm.
really, if you create those barriers that they have to go to actually get access to things or to talk about it, then it becomes much, much more disabling than if you actually just make a system that is so easier to navigate, easier to have the awareness to understand what is the problem and how you can go about it, easy to have the choice of the different devices you can use or the different services you can use, right?
Yeah, that's so true, because if we understand that disability is like a difference from our capacities, and we all have different skills, we all have different characteristics, and so we are gonna be more capable of something, less capable of something else. And then disability is something that is always related to the environment, the things that surround you, and how they make you um, being able to do something, being able to complete the task you want, or to express the thing you want to express. So yeah, that's really insightful.
Yeah, 100%. And just to show an example of the design fictions I was creating, I think this one is a cute one.
Yeah.
Basically, I took a little AirPods box and kind of created the intersection of the way they tell the stories about cigars or cigarettes nowadays. So, really, those warning labels talking
Yeah.
about how you can lose, have diminished empathy, increased isolation, all of those things we're talking about hearing loss, or generally the not listening too much on loud noises so you don't start losing your hearing, and really having a graph here in the back showing, oh, okay, so the AirPods can cause this amount of decibels, this amount of decibels, and if you get around this area, that's when you're going to start losing your hearing. So it really is showing, yeah, this product can cause hearing loss per se. A little bit how
Mhm.
the cigarette storytelling, they're trying to, again, not necessarily in a good or bad way, but they try to put on the cigarettes, oh yeah, this product can cause you cancer. But it's just as a reflection, right? To start a conversation about how
Yeah.
much we use these electronic devices, or how much we have noise pollution and those type of things that really can cause this disability in the long term, and really make your your life much more harder in the long term.
Yeah, that's another big coincidence, I think, because this approach, like of seeing headphones as something that is harmful and that can cause hearing loss, it was also something I explored in an earlier project.
Hmm?
Uh, that I created kind of a concept of a headphone that had these limitations, like like making these reflections about how they could, how we could prevent hearing loss to happen. Um there's lots of layers there because even though we are saying that it can cause hearing loss, it's all about in the end how the users perceive this. Like, is that message being received and how is being received? As you said, uh, hearing loss sometimes it can be something that you don't actually notice. Uh, until you get it, like until you start feeling these impacting your life. But I think it's so interesting, these design fictions. And I remember you mentioned something about how you perceived, like you saw that during the workshops that you had on during your research, these design fictions kind of worked as ways of the of making people think about
Yeah.
all of these that we are talking about. So how was that? What did you notice that was key elements, key things for these reflections?
Yeah, I think for me it was very interesting having a couple of co-creation workshops, both to create the stories, so trying to really include some different minds there on the first workshops to create a little bit what were going to be end up being these 7 design fictions that I developed. And then on the last workshop, we had some interesting conversations because some people there had hearing loss. They were from the Swedish Association of People with Hearing Loss. And some people there didn't really think hearing loss was a problem to begin with, but they kind of entertained the idea of coming to the workshop. And it was quite an interesting conversation there, just realizing that it might be a problem and start connecting with their own life stories and people that they know, and how that kind of created a big conversation in between these different groups and different generations about hearing loss and how it can impact people that have hearing loss, but also people that don't have and might have, or people that have family members that are a little bit behind in actually admitting that they have hearing loss and all of that stuff. So I think in general, the idea of using speculative design or design fictions here was really to just open the conversation, to put there in a much more digestible way. This is a problem that is going to be much, much worse in the coming decades. We have to talk about it. Let's start by looking at this and talking about how AirPods nowadays can be increasing this, or let's talk about how earwear can be a fashionable item, or let's
Mm.
talk about how we stigmatize even more the older generation that might have hearing loss by saying in like clinics saying that, oh, come and we're going to fix your aid
Mm.
or something, right? So this way and design is so much intertwined with storytelling, so we cannot like take it for granted, and we can use also storytelling and speculative storytelling to create these new conversations going on.
Yes, I think this is key because then you can actually see how this is a systemic problem and kind of influence it in a systemic way than
Mhm.
just looking into a solution that is not gonna fix the problem. So if we start the conversation, maybe we can kind of plant these seeds of reflection that then can evolve into creating this future we really want when stigma is not when we don't have this stigma, these negative associations with disability, for example.
Yeah, 100%. But now I'll open it up also for our community members to ask us some questions. I do see there's some already in the chat, so we can go a little bit through some of them. Maybe you can
Great.
start. It's not a question per se, but Cosette, sorry, was just talking about how when you pair hearing loss with Alzheimer's or dementia, it really creates a much difficult situation also with remembering their hearing aids and things like that. Was that something that came across a little bit on your research, the pairing of those other diseases?
No, no, I don't remember seeing that, but yes, definitely, I think it's an important thing to address, and that the disability is not ever isolated. It's always something that it has to be connected with the person itself. Who is this person? What is this context? And so yeah, that's
Yeah. And I think
important.
personally also my grandpa always forgets to charge his hearing aids. And then I imagine that if he had dementia, it would be just like it's even one more step. You have to charge it, you have to take it out, you have to put it on every day, right? So
That's
and
true.
then yeah, and then let me see. Wait. Then Katie was saying, how do we develop the perception of these assistive devices? And it seems there's a huge opportunity to better serve this community.
This is historically constructed, I think. But the thing is that we have this stigma towards disability, and so the assistive devices, they end up carrying these all these negative perceptions. So the aesthetic features that are most common to these objects end up being the ones that carry more these negative perceptions, because with time we start to make these associations. So if we can try to look into totally different aesthetic features and how they would be perceived. That is what we are talking about here. That is like perceiving, like noticing what are these different things that we can try and maybe create these objects that are different, are something that make us think differently about these meanings
Yeah.
that we give to disability.
And I think also no two perceptions are the same, right? So it goes back to that thing of choice that you're talking about. There was
Mm.
one very interesting story that I had from one of my interviews that the person was telling me that somebody had one of those hearing aids that look very much like AirPods, but they're actually hearing aids. And he
Mm-hmm.
was in the supermarket, and the cashier was like, "Oh, take them off! Like you cannot hear me." And I was like trying to explain that those were not AirPods; they were actually hearing aids. And in other situations, maybe people like to have those to show that to not show that they're hearing aids per se, but to that cashier, there was this kind of perception that the person using AirPods was kind of ignoring what they're trying to say.
Yes, yes, that's interesting because it's about the context also, not no perception is the same. Yeah.
Yeah. And then Cosette again is asking, how do you feel about the inclusion of hearing assistive devices technologies in product design? And in what ways do you think it improves accessibility and overall user experience?
Well, user experience is complex thing because uh, we talked about aesthetics. My research was about aesthetics, but for example, my grandmother also wears a hearing aid nowadays, and she has difficulty putting the hearing aid into her ear, and so this is all about user experience. She doesn't have any other restrictions about it, but she can't physically. wear it because of these the experience itself. And so this is very important, like to think about the product as a whole. And this means like the experience but also the aesthetics, so everything. I guess this is something we can start with to think about improving accessibility. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Then finally, Katie is asking, do you see the use of speculative design and design fiction creating a psychological safety in the exploration or ideation phases? And I think you can take that one. I
Sure.
would say that it was quite an interesting thing to pair those two kind of ways of thinking, speculative design, design fictions, with co-creation. So really involving other people around it. I think you can learn a lot because it helps create new conversations that sometimes are quite hard to be had. Mainly like when we're talking about hearing loss or other type of wicked problems that we might have a lot of perceptions, but we don't know how to really express them into words. So if you create an artifact, a future artifact, a design fiction artifact, you really kind of pave a little bit of a road to make it easier for people to talk about it without using the artifact as a way to talk about it. So I personally think that through the co-creation sessions, people started to feel much more safe to talk about it because they could just use the artifact as a pinpoint to start the conversation.
Yeah, that's great. It really makes sense.
Yeah. And to that, we come to the end of our session. So thank you very much, Julia, for coming and talking with me and with our service design community.
Thank you so much for having me, Felipe. It was great, very interesting to hear about your research, and yeah, really great to be here.
Yeah, also you. Bye.
Bye bye. Thank you.
And to everybody that joined us online, thank you very much for your questions, for your interactions, and I hope that it was a quite insightful session for all of you. And I hope to see you again next week. So bye bye.